All right, so today I'm going to talk about one of the most controversial novels ever written, and that is Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. I'm a graduate student researching Russian literature, and I want to give you just some little literary details to pay attention to while you read, talk about my experience reading the book, and some of the criticism it received at the time of its publication. Without further ado, Lolita was published in 1955, but in Paris. So it was written in English while Nabokov was living in the US, but it was published in Paris so he could actually avoid some censorship because it would have been a bit too scandalous for his American audience. At least that's what he was scared of, and he had good reason to be afraid. If you don't already know, this novel is essentially about a pedophile and his grooming of a child. It has a frame narrative. It opens with the protagonist narrator, Humbert, sitting in prison describing the story of his crime, which is, of course, the seduction of a girl named Dolores Hayes. She is the daughter of Humbert's landlord. And just so you know, Humbert is a pseudonym. All the names in this story are made up. And you can tell they're made up. Nabokov and Humbert don't conceal this, but I actually just made a fatal error of conflating the author with the narrator. And we can use that mistake actually as a sort of exercise, because that's what people did when they read this book. They thought Nabokov must be a pedophile. But in fact, it seems obvious to us that you can write about a subject without knowing or experiencing it firsthand. That's just called using your imagination. But actually, there are so many clues within this novel that it is a highly constructed piece of fiction, and that we are actually supposed to be aware of that while we read. And that is what I am actually hoping to talk to you all about today. But let's start with an excerpt to kind of set the tone. So Humbert writes, Lolita, light of my life, fire of my loins, my sin, my soul, Lolita. The tip of the tongue taking a trip of 3 steps down the palate to tap at 3 on the teeth. Lolita. She was low, plain low in the morning, standing 4 feet 10 in one sock. She was Lola in slacks. She was Dolly at school. She was Dolores on the dotted line, but in my arms, she was always Lolita. That gives me chills just to read it. How creepy is that? If we are to read Humbert's name, if we pronounce it the French way, which you would, considering that the character is from a French-speaking country. He's an immigrant in the US. It's, I don't want to butcher this, Humbert, which sounds like the word ombre for shadow. We've got shadow, we've got Dolores Hayes. It's made up, it's fiction, and it's supposed to be. The middle syllable of Lolita's name is also symbolic. Lee, Annabel Lee, the famous poem by Edgar Allan Poe about a little girl who's the object of the narrator's desire. Why does Humbert bestow this nickname on his victim? Dolores and Lolita, they don't even sound alike. Why this nickname? Essentially, it's his way of appropriating his victim. By having a designator for her that only he knows, he gets to take what is an innocent girl named Dolores and make her the object of his fantasies and desires, his muse. It's terrible, don't get me wrong, but let's keep going. Now, storytelling, like I said, is a pertinent motif in all of Nabokov's works, and butterflies often symbol Nabokov's authorial presence because he was actually a butterfly hunter. Yeah, you can use that word. He would go all around and collect butterflies, give them to museums. He worked with museums. And so when his wife Vera, in an interview, she was really concerned about the fact that everyone was conflating her husband Nabokov with his protagonist Humbert. She once said, there is no correlation between entomology, the study of insects, and Humbertology. I love that quote. I just think it's so cheeky. Instead of just saying, my husband's not a pedophile, she does it in this super witty, endearing way, I think, at least. What else can we say? Oh, another literary allusion would be for Dolores's 13th birthday, Humbert gifts her a copy of Hans Christian Andersen's The Little Mermaid, a story about metamorphosis. Dolores is turning 13. She's no longer a child. Now she's a teenager. She's changing, transforming, and Humbert takes obviously such perverse pleasure in her going through puberty. When it comes to the reception of this work, what I find absolutely fascinating is that critics were actually more preoccupied with Humbert's English than they were with his pedophilia. Humbert's English is seen as bothersome, scandalous. He often slips into French. He peppers his phrases with French words. This is something that drives Dolores crazy. And then when he does speak English, he uses his extremely lofty, this high-flown register that is so at odds with the novel's setting, which is suburban America. And that's where a lot of this kind of fun clash and tensions come from. We have the way Humbert describes the world around him and the way it actually is. So Nabokov was published for his hubris in the end. He thought that he could just write about pedophilia and people would understand that it's a work of fiction and it could be read as a work of art. But of course, that wasn't the case. But here what I want to talk about is some kind of historical context of Russian modernism. That would be the period kind of loosely, let's say, end of 19th century, early 20th. And there was this practice called life creation or жизнетворчество, which Nabokov absolutely despised. And if you've watched my previous videos, I've talked about this tons, but it was this idea that modernist artists had that life should imitate art and that anything that is beautiful is also moral. And that sets the tone for so much of the work that was created at that time. But the foundational modernist text, it's usually identified as a novel called The Petty Demon by Vladimir Salukov. And essentially this is a novel about a woman's seduction of a little boy. And what's crazy is that when Salukov wrote this, he actually received countless letters in response thanking him from women. Women were writing these letters saying, I had a similar relationship with a little boy in my village. Thank you so much for putting our love story on paper. Isn't that insane? And so what Nabokov does, he shows us how messed up that is by giving us a man seducing a little girl. Somehow, to people, this is more gross than a woman seducing a little boy, which was viewed as kind of beautiful and ethereal, and the little boy was depicted in that novel at least, but in lots of novels, as being androgynous. Androgyny was the epitome of beauty in the modernist context. They loved this idea of gender fluidity, of experimentation. There's another famous modernist novel, also known as kind of the first gay Russian novel, and that is Wings by Mikhail Kuzmin, where a boy essentially realizes that he's gay when he is groomed by his adult male mentor. And people celebrated this as a gay novel, but really, it is, but it's a novel about pedophilia. And so we have what has become in Russian literature a very normalized subject to write about, and what is read as a work of art and also a reflection of sometimes people's lives. Nabokov takes that plot line, writes about it in his own way. He now gives us his take on a popular modernist theme, and he hopes that it's just going to be read. It's going to be read as a book. And instead, he is punished, and obviously, Americans or Anglophones don't have this same kind of cultural context. I shouldn't say cultural, I should say literary context of what Nabokov is writing about and responding to. And he was so involved in these modernist debates around culture. And we see this especially in his novel, The Gift. And now we're getting very niche into kind of like Russian history, but I hope that's what you come into my channel for. I mean, I study all of this in school and I don't expect people to know about it. And I think it can really help you kind of just get what this novel is about. Why was it deemed so controversial? Why should you still read it? I mean, I am so glad I have finally read this novel after years of putting it off, because I was just so scared of the subject matter. I did not want to read a story about pedophilia. Fair. But once you read it, you realize, like, it's just a book. It's a book, and what's more is it's such an incredibly intricate plot, and there's so many like allusions and clues. Like, Nabokov was all about rereading. He felt that it was never enough to just read a novel once. You have to read things multiple times, and this is a book that was written with that intention. So I know what happens at the end of the book. There is a plot twist, and if I was to read it again, I would know what to pay attention to. I would see the clues that were there all along that are so genuinely subtle that you don't pick up on them the first time. Nabokov is a genius. There's absolutely no disputing that. I would not make this your introduction to Nabokov's fiction, me personally, just because I think that the subject matter could be very jarring. Instead, I would read something like Glory, so that you can get a feel for Nabokov's like lyricism and his beautiful language and the way he plays with characters and themes. I'll wrap up this video by just quickly touching upon the Russian translation of the text. So Nabokov started translating his work from English to Russian in 1963 just for fun. But it soon developed into a project of rewriting the novel. And so the Russian version emerges as a commentary on the English original. It is designed for bilingual readers to notice the differences. Nabokov, for him, translation becomes a tool of self-exegesis, a way of showing how misunderstood he was the first time. And he corrects some chronological blunders that he makes, but he leaves one in, and I'll just briefly touch upon that. So Humbert says that his narrative took him 56 days to write. But we know that he dies on November 16, 1952. So that means he began to write his story in jail no later than September 1952. But this does not make sense given a letter that he receives while out in the real world, not in jail, from a certain character. Nabokov he leaves this in, and I know that sounds crazy, but he did it on purpose. He wants you to remember, this is just a work of, this is writing. Someone's brain took these ideas, put them to paper, made mistakes. It's for your enjoyment. It's written for this beautiful process of like becoming so subsumed by a story. Like, that's how I felt when I was reading this. I was addicted. It is so eerie and gross, but at the same time addicting, and you just want to know what happens. And if I haven't convinced you by now, go read Lolita, and if you're interested in Nabokov, you can watch my other videos about him. But thanks so much for watching, and I hope you have an amazing day. Bye.